Today we are going to analyze the last SDG. I think this is the last presentation. But this is not the last SDG, but this is the last presentation we have today. Okay, the SDG 16 is about promoting peaceful, inclusive societies, providing access to justice for all, building effective, accountable, and inclusive institutions at all levels. As we are all aware, the aim is to achieve peace, justice, strong institutions by 2030. We are aware of this goal. And peace itself is a goal, but it's also the condition and the foundation for this SDG and to achieve the rest of the SDGs. Peace is a goal itself and is the foundation to achieve this SDG and the rest of the SDGs, of course. So it's a precondition for social and economic development, because without peace, societies that are often plagued with violence, conflict, the development is hindered because of the losses of resources and lives. So justice refers to equal access, is essential to protect human rights, fundamental rights, and of course resolving disputes and ensuring that vulnerable populations have access to justice. Strong institutions, I want to highlight that when it refers, or you hear in this SDG, strong institutions, it's not referring to strong as in power, but strong in effective. Because strong in power means strong in authority or totalitarianism. It's strong in effective, how these institutions are strong enough to provide the services and that they have to provide and hold themselves accountable and the people accountable, depending on the institution that we analyze. Well, 2030, the goals by this year. No, here are the targets of the Sustainable Development Goal 16. I'm not going to explain each of these because anyone can just access the information online. Instead, for this presentation, I wrote 3 cases. I hope that we can analyze all of them, but cases. So through the cases, my plan is to match one of the targets that we are seeing here with the context that will happen in reality. The context is of course conflict or war, and the solutions of how it was dealt with the issues. Okay. So here is the outline. I'm going to start defining key terms, these key terms, and the case studies. The first one is the peace building and the peace agreement in Colombia. The Escazú agreement, which is an agreement for environmental, social conflicts. And the last case is the UNOPS scandal. And at the end, let's have a discussion, and I will do a very brief exercise for policy recommendation. So let's jump in. So peaceful societies, did you all know that peace can be defined from different perspectives? So peace can be defined in a negative way, which is peace is the absence of war or violence. But other people, on the other hand, others define it positive. The positive peace concept came into knowledge in the academia by a Norwegian sociologist called Johan Galtung, and according to the Positive Peace Report in 2022, just a little parenthesis, I really recommend you all to, when you are going to draft a policy recommendation, to back up your policy with reports that have already data on, depending on the topic that you're going to draft, of course. For example, this is a positive peace report by the Institute for Economic Peace that I read for this presentation today. And if you find this kind of report or index that tracks the implementation of the particular SDG that you are analyzing, or all overall, it will be very useful for your policy recommendation. So According to this positive peace report, the last year, because this year haven't been released, positive peace is transformational. It means it contains the necessary conditions for peace and society to flourish. You might ask, what does it mean? So it means a strong societies that perform well in peace, they often perform well under these 8 pillars. And just to clarify, I would like to make an analogy. What does it mean analyzing peace positively and negatively? So when you have a disease, or when someone studies a disease, you can study the disease itself, what is happening. Or you can study how to prevent the disease. So which means how to be healthy, balanced diet, or mental health. So this prevention is the study of peace, which is different from the study of conflict or war. So we need to distinguish the two types of analysis of studies. So we have these 8 pillars, and I would like to go through them quickly. We have time. So the first is the well-functioning government. So this is about the high quality of public and social civil services. So allowing the participation and demonstrating political stability and upholding, of course, the rule of law, that I will explain later. Sound business environment refers to the economic conditions that allow operation of the private sector, which means in a country that is in a conflict or a war, hardly, I would say, possible foreign investment will happen. So business will not flourish, be conducted in comparison to a country that is not in war. So the next one is low levels of corruption. The problem of corruption is that resources are not well allocated because the corruption takes the resources to be invested in certain agenda. So there is a lack of funding for essential services. So we live in Korea and we take for granted drinkable water, electricity. But in countries that are in war or in a conflict, or because of corruption, these services are not granted because resources, taxes are taken for the funding of these corrupted government or institutions. Next one is acceptance of the rights of others. So this is about the existence of formal law or codification, which guarantee the human rights protections, the fundamental rights, and of course, it controls the behavior in the relationships among the civilians and relationships with the civilians and the state in the access of justice. Next one, high levels of human capital. So human capital is the level of education, experience, and skills that you all have, and you will put those skills and that education, that experience into the market, labor market. When a society is in a conflict or any type of conflict, educated citizens are less, and it doesn't promote, of course, the economic productivity decreases. What is of the pillars today. Good relationships with neighbors. Well, this is really, you can see that in the news every day. War happens with, between states, with the states that are neighbors. Rarely and hardly will happen a war between Korea and Colombia. So harmonious relations with the other countries is very important, but also within the country. So in countries that exist minorities, ethnic minorities, religious, or any type of minorities, it's necessary to keep the harmonious relationship. within the country and in relationship with other countries, neighbor countries. Free flow of information. Free and independent media is crucial to achieve this. So in a country that the biggest media are taken by the government, let's see, the government hires someone just finger pointing, someone, the CEO of one of the biggest media, just to develop their agenda and control the decision making of the citizens. This hinders peace, actually. Equitable distribution of resources. So peaceful countries tend to ensure access to all type of resources. Education is a resource, health, and of course natural resources. And yeah, we are done with the pillars today. Let's continue. Access to justice. This is one of the terms for the SDG 16. So access to justice is a principle of the rule of law. So for today, instead of analyzing what is justice, because this is a very theoretical concept, I decide to approach this negatively. It means giving you insights how the access can be hindered, obstacles can happen to the access of justice. So the obstacles can be when the judicial system is not independent. As I'm sure you all know, democratic countries, democracy needs a separation of powers. The powers are the legislative power, executive power, and judicial power. So usually in dictatorship that takes the executive power controls the rest of the power, the legislative and the judiciary, and end up with being authoritarianism and just hinder peace and development. Another obstacle is the cost of legal advice and representation. In most of the countries, hire a lawyer is extremely expensive. That's why it needs to be implemented legal aid programs. And of course, private firms, they take pro bono cases. And the last, I would like to share with you the access to persons with disabilities. It's necessary to access to justice, to the court system, promote the people with disabilities, for example, blind, or someone who's using a wheelchair, have the full access to the core services, not only physically in building, but also through all the process, hiring the lawyer, knowing how is going his case, all this. And this the second point, formal justice system and informal justice system. So I just want to share with you that there are two types of justice system. The formal one is access through the lawyer and through the procedures to court, depending on the case you have. Exists a criminal court, family court, but there is also informal justice system, which is the alternative mechanisms of dispute resolution, conciliation, arbitration, this kind of systems. Okay, inclusive society. So this aspect is linked to the commitment of leaving no one behind. So it's defined in the Copenhagen World Summit for Social Development as an inclusive society is a society for all in which every individual has rights and responsibilities and has an active role to play. I try to define inclusion, that word particular word, and analyzing the literature about it. However, it is difficult to bring a formal definition, but there is a commitment in the literature that to analyze inclusion, you can analyze through social inclusion and economic inclusion. So in terms of social inclusion, it can define the guarantee to equal access regardless of your background, your conditions, employment, education, to public services, and participating in the decision-making process, which is not only the electoral participation, vote for your representatives, political involvement, or consultation. When some laws are going to be enacted, it's necessary that communities are consulted because they're going to be affected somehow. So, for example, when environmental project will take place in certain rural areas. Social cohesion is more a sense of belonging. It is more about inclusion and recognition. This implies the attitude of trust and trustworthiness. Okay, effective, accountable, and inclusive institution. This is a key component for good governance because an effective institution means that the structure of the system is capable to deliver the efficient outcome. So just let's take an example, the judicial system, that the structure is clear, you know how to access, you know how process will take place and how are the steps to deliver an efficient outcome. Accountability and accountable institution is referred to the responsible and take ownership of the actions and decisions that they might commit. So it's about responsibility. Take the ownership of the wrongdoings. Something happened, so they take accountability. And of course, the transparency in operations, that you can access to the information that, depending, there are certain information that is confidential, but most of the information that you can access to ensure effectiveness in the outcomes is public. And inclusive institutions will consider the interests and needs of all members of society, ensuring that no one is marginalized. So how? Through non-discriminatory policies, protection of minority rights, and equal access to opportunity and resources. So when I refer to minority rights, is referring often to ethnic minorities, and Korea don't have ethnic minorities, so in countries, Latin American countries, because different races coexist, different ethnics, I would say, coexist. Some of them are minorities, and we can let them. Okay, the rule of law. Rule of law, this can be approached from different ways, but it can be a value, it can be a system, institution, a principle, but just to keep in mind, simple concept is a system in which the state will be governed by the law, not by some president or ruler or elected representative. So we are all under the governance of law. We, the president, the government, everybody is under the governance of law. And so this is important because society is bound and can be controlled and accountable only to law, and it has to be applied, of course, to everyone equally. So let's move on to the cases. So I hope this is going to be interesting for you all. So have any one of you seen Narcos in Netflix? Okay, Narcos is one of the series portraying the drugs war in Colombia, but I would like to say that Narcos is just a second of the whole complexities that happen in the world. It doesn't portray the causes, the roots of this war, no, just for entertainment, yeah. So the actors in the world, I will start to explain this through the actors, because we need to know that there are so many actors involved in this conflict. Of course, the Colombian state is the first actor, represented by the Colombian Army and Police. FARC, this is the pronunciation in Spanish, is a group illegal armed group created in the 60s, 1964. So to understand why they were created, we need to understand that Colombia has been controlled by a land-owning elite, which means, in other words, people who has power because they are owners of huge amounts of land. So the situation has, as a result, peasants and farmers, they don't have hold the ownership of the land they work on. And so this is create, a very unstable relations. So when this particular group was created, a military operation was launched to what? To control, stop these farmers and these communities that they felt this situation wasn't fair to them. So they wanted to start, they were organizing themselves like a protest, but they end up deciding to actually create a group, illegal armed group with guns to confront, of course, a military operation. So imagine if a military operation is launched to kick out from your house. Well, you have options of running, surrendering, or fight. They decide to fight. And at the same time, other group was created, the ELN, or in Spanish, ELN. This is a group created by students and actually priests. They were inspired by the Cuban Revolution, and they were strongly influenced by the Guevarista ideology. You know Che Guevara in the Cuban Revolution. And they technically still in war. This peace agreement only was between the government, the Colombian state, and the FARC. So technically, the ELN is still in military operation, illegal. And they entered an ongoing peace talks in 2017. And last but not least, the paramilitaries. They were created actually by these landowners. Remember the story that I just told you before? The people who are the owners of huge amounts of land. Well, they create their own, let's say, private army. And these groups were sponsored by business leaders, drug cartels, and even the Colombian state promoted these paramilitaries because they thought it will help to confront the conflict with the FARC and ELN. So it's a very complex situation with the paramilitaries because it has led to so many human rights violations. Imagine if there is an illegal group, armed group, sponsored by your government. So I try to use this timeline to understand more how was this peace building that ended in the peace agreement. So as I mentioned, in 1964, the FARC was formed. I'm not going to talk more about that. In 1984, the first peace bill was initiated. So the Conservative Party president tried to initiate talks back then, but the paramilitaries assassinated one of the presidential candidates that was very aligned to the ideology of the FARC. The ideology itself, you think about it, is promoting equalism. End up to not be like that and end up for creating a conflict, including drugs and so many human rights violations. But the ideology initially was about equalism. Now, presidential candidate aligned with that, but was assassinated by paramilitaries. So this was fake. In 1996, hostage were taken with Asimitis. That year, the FARC initiated a strategy to push the government, launching massive kidnapping operations, say, and initiated with kidnapping, taking hostages, soldiers of the Colombian army. Later, move on to the kidnapping of rich people, even civilians, just for some reason in exchange. So in 2000, initiated Plan Colombia, or Colombian Plan, and it's because of this war. I think something that I want to make clear here, didn't initiate because of drugs, but drugs has become a source of profit, a source of how to finance the war for the illegal groups. So the Plan Colombia, or Colombian Plan, is a joint strategy, anti-narcotics strategy with the United States and Colombia. So it's expanded to include anti-guerrilla operations. Washington has spent more than 10 billions of dollars in these operations, anti-narcotics operations. That includes basically the eradication of coca fields. How? Through fumigations or by hand. This is basically how it works, that strategy. In 2002, as Betancourt captured, Betancourt was one of the first female presidential candidates in Colombia, and she was kidnapped, taken as a hostage for 6 years, and she becomes international symbol of the country. If you do some research back then in the news, you can find very sad photos of how she was, her condition. She was captive. In 2011, FARC leader killed. So later on, a president took the office, and his strategy was eradicate the group by violence, not total. So as a consequence, the top commanders were killed, and so just one remained, who was the one who reached out for starting talks, peace talks. So in 2012, so after the FARC fell weak, after losing many of their top commanders, they decided to start peace talks with the former president Juan Manuel Santos, who won the Peace Nobel Prize. And finally, in 2016, the peace deal was finally agreed and signed a definitive ceasefire and disarmament agreement. So that was the whole peace building process. It takes a long time, as you can see. So the peace agreement, let's focus on the peace agreement today, to be fully considered, has had to go through referendum. Or I don't know if you know what's a referendum, but I just make a little definition here. Is a direct democratic process in which the government asks a specific public issue to the people, to the electorate, and assessing a public opinion over some change of law, change in the constitution. But it's more like an opinion. It's not binding, right? So this peace agreement went through this referendum, and guess what? Colombian people say no, they don't want peace. So that was really disappointing for many, but as I mentioned, this is not binding. So they just took into consideration the reasons why the general opinion was not agreed with the peace agreement and made the changes. So this specific part of this case study, I would like to tell you that the referendum concurs or match with the target. Bear with me, I'm going to come back. the target 16.7. So ensure responsive, inclusive, participatory, and representative decision making at all levels. So through putting peace agreement to referendum, ensure actually this target to take reality, to take into consideration. So sorry for this. Okay. The agreement name is the final agreement between the armed conflict and the stable and lasting peace, as I mentioned, was signed in 2016, and finally in November 24 was signed in the Havana, Cuba, and in every type of peace agreement, there is third parties. There are observers that everything that is happening is conducted in a well. I mean, everybody's here. Actually, that's the most important part. The parties are here. And a conflict that lasted more than 50 years. Imagine how long were these peace talks. The third part is where the Republic of Cuba, the Kingdom of Norway, the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela, and the Republic of Chile. So let's go into. Well, I think we have time. I will try to go very quickly through this because this is actually the agreement. It was composed in 6 parts, but every part was negotiated as a separate agreement, but as a whole, it's one agreement. Okay. So the first part is the comprehensive rural reform. As I initiate talking today, and I think that's part that I want to highlight, the roots of this war happened in the rural area, in the countryside of Colombia. And a war that lasted more than 40 years, 50 years, war found order. What does it mean? So operations and what you see on news, bombs, attacks, happened mostly in the countryside. So Colombian cities were kind of safe, and people just conduct their life normally on the cities, but the countryside and the rural areas were very difficult, and most of the human rights violations happening there, and forcing not only the rural areas, but in the Amazon part, it's very in the jungle area, in the south. So this rural reform instated a land fund for the redistribution of land. Remember that this started because the farmers and the peasants, they didn't feel fairness in if they are working on the land. Why it belongs to just one person, huge amount of hectares of land. So the redistribution of land is important for this war in particular. Okay, so again, like my objective in this presentation is to match with the targets. So this particular rural reform in this peace agreement matches with the target 16.10. So ensure public access to information and protect fundamental freedoms in accordance with national legislation. So why access to information? Because when this rural reform implies then knowing who is the owner of certain land, sharing you work in this land, or this land had no owner, because that happened a lot in Colombia. There are many hectares of land that has not really owner. As you can see, buy the land, register your property. That is certain areas don't have that. Fundamental freedoms, of course, property rights. Okay, and just be aware of the time. The political participation and democratic opportunity to build peace. This is related to guarantee that the FARC actually can have political presence. political opposition. Opposition is very important in every democratic society. It's really important because it balances, it counters the opposition. So the FARC wanted to take political participation up and recognize legally as an opposition to elections, political movements, having even a political party. So they allow the creation of political groups with legal status, with members, the former members of FARC. And in this case, they ask for special protection, of course, because they are transitioning to be, well, part of this conflict as war actors to civilians with political participation. And so this point concurs or match with, thank you, bear with me this, the SDG, the targets of 16.7, ensure responsive, inclusive, participatory, and representative decision making at all levels. That was mean all levels, included even those who were formerly war actors. Okay. The end of the conflict is the third part of this agreement. It's very self-explanatory. Is the ceasefire, is the cessation of hostilities, is laying down the arms. So this was verifiable. Just the process is pretty much straightforward. Just return the guns, the weapons, to the UN and receive the weaponry, and they construct monuments with those weapons. It matches with the concurs with the target 16.1, significantly reduce all forms of violence and reduce the threats everywhere. Of course, the point 2, and abuse, exploitation, trafficking, all forms of violence against and torture of children. Children were taken to this war as part to join these military operations, soldiers, I would say, which is one of the biggest crimes that these groups have committed. And 16.0 by 2030 significantly reduce illicit financial arms flows, strengthen the recovery and return of stolen assets, and combat all forms of organized crime. So it matches, and actually this goal, this target has been achieved through this agreement. So I don't have more time because I have other things to talk about, but I will take the point 5 because this is very important. The comprehensive system for truth, justice, reparation, and non-recompense. This particular disagreement creates a special jurisdiction to judge these war crimes. It happens after a war. It is the first thing that happens is create a special code, special jurisdiction system to judge only these crimes. So if there is this agreement has some amnesty law to some crimes that wasn't that, I have to say, every crime is serious, but they create levels of when it's a crime that becomes, that was like a massacre or something like that, their amnesty law was unapplicable. But in the part of this agreement, the creation of this true justice, reparation, and non-recurrence, this idea implies the creation of a code. Okay, that one matches with the, I'm going to go back. The target is the 16.3, promote the rule of law at the national levels and ensure equal access to justice for all. So as I mentioned, we all are governed by the law, so it applies, of course, also to the former members of these illegal armed groups. And the access to justice for all, basically, this core of this special judicial system is to ensure the access of victims to find themselves some kind of justice after all the horrors that they lived through this war. So. Okay, and the final part that I wanted to highlight is the houses verification and implementation. So they decided to take 15 years to implement the whole agreement, the peace agreement, and the verification has been done internally and externally through the missions of the UN. That through these resolutions, they create a verification mission or mission de verificación to monitoring and verifying the ceasefire and hostilities. But there are so many resolutions, so I just took the first and the latest one. But through all these years, this verification mission of verification has been extended. And as I mentioned at the beginning of this, that I suggest you for your policy recommendation to go through reports of institutions. There is an institution called Kroc Institute by the University of Notre Dame that they have the largest way to, they have a huge database to actually know how a peace agreement has to be measured and tracked quantitatively. And we can see here in this graph how it's going on actually the 6 parts of this agreement. So just to highlight the low percentage of commitments in an intermediate state of implementation is 20%, while there is a high percent of minimum and uninitiated commitments with 37% and 30% respectively. There is long way to go to achieve all parts of it. So that's what I wanted to highlight, that there's still a lot of work to do to achieve each of the 6 part of the word agreed. Okay, so let's move on to the second case. The second case that I brought today with you all is I'm going very quickly with this one because I'm going to be focused on the third case. So just with this case, the SCASU agreement, or specifically the regional agreement on access to information, public participation, and justice in environmental matters in Latin America and the Caribbean. It's very long. I just wanted to bring to you the concept of socio-environmental conflict. Conflicts are many types of conflicts. As I mentioned before, the Colombian conflict started by the inequalities regarding distribution of land, or the countryside, farmers, and this business, harvesting, selling, all of that create this problem, right? So, but here, the social environmental conflict, just with simple way, in the simple words, because we can talk about this in another session, is the clash between conservation and economic activities, usually extractive industries like mining, oil exploitation. So there is this dichotomy, this 2 sides: conservation of the natural resources, and on the other hand, these economic activities that threat, in some cases, threat ecosystem, with the creation of habitat destruction, of biodiversity, and pollution in some of the cases. So usually this conflict is a result of projects, mining projects, oil. In general, we can say extractive industries projects. Because companies want to have control over the natural resources, but the natural resources belong to us, to all of us. At least in Latin America, the natural resources it belongs to everyone, and the government has control over it, but responding the general interest, nor private interest. So this treaty is a treaty. This treaty tried to enhance the link between human rights and environmental defense. Do you all know that environmental defenders get often death threats, not to themselves, but also to their families, death threats because of these commitments, protecting the environment? This is one of the biggest issues in whole Latin America. Latin America is full of natural resources, and because of this, these situations happen a lot. These environmental defenders are often threatened. So the treaty imposed obligation on the state parties regarding the protection of environmental human rights regarding their safety priority. And of course, the access to information. This part is important because when a project is initiated, I think if you all in Korea might happen that some people only knows where it's going to happen, what is going to happen. But this ensures that projects that are going to be implemented in communities and potentially will affect the environment, affect some ecosystem, particular ecosystem, that information about that project has to be public. So I'm not going to explain that in the but if you are all interested in this, I recommend you to take this course. It's online. It's very simple and it's a self-paced. It is an introductory course on SDG 16 and access rights. They talk about other conventions similar to this CASU agreement, and they explain indeed this CASU agreement. Okay, let's move on to the last case. So this the UNOPS scandal. So the UNOPS is the United Nations Office for Project Services. So this agency particularly provides management, infrastructure, procurement services to government, non-governmental organizations, and UN agencies. So what was the scandal about? So you can find this actually in the news. A former UN senior staff revealed in a blog. I don't know if you know a blog. It's actually news called DEVEX, DEVEX. Well, I suggest you to go to that news. It's very informative, and it's very focused on development and track the efficiency of the UN. So it's very interesting. So in that website, there is a blog. So this UN senior staff, he uploaded allegations against one of the initiatives of the UNOPS called S3I initiative. And this initiative was meant to provide affordable housing, renewable energy, health infrastructure. But this senior staff said that his accusations were that the money that was put into these projects, the contracting were just done wrongly, not through the regular way, just pointing someone, hiding money, pointing someone that has some alliance with the contractors on this particular project. So the problem is they put into risk $60 million and they potentially lost $20 million. So this initiated, because of these accusations, don't actually public. This initiated an internal investigation. So I used to be part of the Independent Integrity Fund, and this every agency fund of the UN or some agencies, they have their independent internal oversight mechanisms. So what does it mean? So because it's very hard to understand what does it mean. So independent is an office, right? That any wrongdoing, fraud, conflict of interest, abuse of power, this kind of conflicts that happen when a project is initiated, is in somewhere taking place. When all of these wrongdoings or prohibited practices take place, this office is in charge of first investigating. So it's called internal investigations. And they to know what is, if it's actually independent, you have to check just to check the basic text of independence of any oversight mechanism is the reporting mechanism. If it reports to the board, it's independent. But if it reports to the executive director, that's just a management tool. Because a board implies several parts that usually most of the UN receive contribution from countries, right? So the board is conformed by representative of the contributors. So this takes more independence in terms of reporting. So as I mentioned, first start with an internal investigation. That happens here, of course, with this scandal. They did an internal investigation. Then the investigation was reviewed by an accountant firm. They reviewed the report of the investigation, and the conclusion was, well, the executive director resigned, and the chief executive was put in administrative leave. And the conclusion was that whistleblower policy, and specifically in the UNOPS, was not functional. That's really meaningful in terms, because this is what I want to talk to you today. Whistleblowers' protections is very important to ensure the effective and accountability of, in this case particularly, this UNOPS is part of the UN, but actually whistleblowers protection policies applies to private and charity government. So for today, this is the discussion. I bring this exercise in which I want to just talk more about the whistleblowers protection policies and just a little recommendation. When you're going to draft a policy recommendation, try to make it actionable. So you can ask yourself this. Just try to make it simple and straightforward. Ask yourself these questions. These policies for this is a recommendation, right? But yeah, in this stage of recommendation, ask yourself, who should conduct the action? What exactly should be done? Why should be the policy implemented? This is a rational. This is the theoretical part. Where should it happen? When the deadlines should be executed to its completion, and how should it be done? So this very simple question will guide you to draft a meaningful and actionable policy recommendation. So very simple, that's my recommendation. And for the whistleblowers protection policy, so who's a whistleblower? Who can be a whistleblower? Any ideas? Well, anyone can be a whistleblower, actually. So, but in this case, in the UNOPS is basically the people that actually work closely with the projects, and the staff, the contractors, external stakeholders, even interns. If you get an internship with any of those organizations and you notice something are wrongdoing in conflict of interest, you should report. So a whistleblower is someone who reports something that sees that is wrong in the organization. As I said, this doesn't only apply for the UN agencies or UN system, applies also to private organizations and the government. So actually Korea has I found something about it, how is at governmental level take this into consideration. So I would say work protection policy is for what? It's clear what is a whistleblower. So for what exactly should be done to create a policy recommendation to whistleblowers? Well, I would do. So what should be done? So protection, yeah, that's the word, protection. So actually, when you get the topic for your policy recommendation from the title, you can get the insights. So what should we do? Protect. How? So protection, personal protection, first of all. So when you report something that on this level, of some corruption at this level, so your integrity might be in danger. So how is protected? By the first, your report should be anonymous to protect your identity. But if it doesn't happen, because it happens that your identity could be leaked, so the personal protection should be done by law enforcement. No other option. So law enforcement should protect your integrity and your family. Of protection against legal actions. People in general feel afraid of reporting something because they feel, oh, if this is not, I'm just suspecting, it's not right, they might sue me, right? Well, under the policy of whistleblowers protection, exists this protection against legal actions. And another type of protection is unfair treatments. When it happens inside of an organization, let's imagine GC, the Green Climate Fund. So someone report a wrongdoing conflict of interest in their office. So if the identity was leaked, the identity was revealed, whatever reason, unfair treatments can be discriminatory actions in the workplace. I don't give you enough work, or everybody ignores the person. This kind of bullying. So in that case, the unfair treatments respond to just, there are many ways to confront this. It can be put the person in administrative leave, or change the unit, or work from home. It depending on the case specifically. So where, of course, okay, the why part. The why part is the theoretical part that you have to create and construct the rationale. My suggestion is, of course, link everything that you're thinking that should be recommended with the SDGs, the targets. Like this particular policy in this aspect develops and aims to achieve particular target. Where? Well, this depends on the context, country, institution. When? Depending on the case that you will get, you are going to do. So I don't know how. The how part is who's going to, how it will be done. It takes resources, allocation, public organizations. So it's more about the steps of the process, depending on where are you going to implement this whistleblowers protection. So I'm over the time, but we start at 10 minutes after. So anyways, if anyone has a question, feel free to ask. I'm here for that. But if you want to elaborate your question more, just email me. I will be delighted to answer your questions, and if I can help you. So, and thank you so much, of course, for your participation.
I just want to ask, even though there are institutions that there's more like SDG, but there are a lot of wars going on in the world right now, like Korean and Russian war, or Palestinian Israel war. So what do you think is the divisions, or what lies in the world right now for hindering the peace in the world?
what I think peace is, what is hindering the achievement of peace in the world. Wow. This is linked to, depending on the context of each war, but in general, I would say the lack of development inside of each country. For example, the example you gave, Ukraine, Russia, Palestine, Israel. Inside of these countries, there is lack of accountability, instability. All what I explained this in this very first part, remember, this the peaceful society. Actually, these pillars are very insightful to analyze why peace is not happening. Because, as I said, peace is not the lack of violence. Peace is related to the development of the achievement of accountability, integrity, transparency of their institutions. And once that happens, of course, the rest of the SDGs I suppose it will work the right way. So I would say these pillars of positive peace are hindered inside of within the country, and is expanding to the international relations. I explained to you the Colombian conflict because it's internal conflict, and most of the conflict that you can see on the news and just take people aware of and people get impressed by is this international conflict.
Great. Thank you once again. Give a big round of applause to